Hello, my name's Cindy Barber and I'm writer of the Chronicle of Killian series. The first book is Keeper the Keystone and I'm on chapter 5 called The Watch. A million love songs are made of, and here I am. Oh no, not again, Michael winced as he opened the front door. Entering his second floor, 2-bedroom flat after school had become something of a ritual for Michael, who had grown up cringing at his mother's love of a pop group called Take That. He would approach with caution, check that no one he knew was standing nearby, then dive in and slam the door behind him. Hazel and Dan teased him about his slightly eccentric entrance and his unreasonable fear, but he had become paranoid about anyone hearing his mum sing, especially since Alvin and Animal had overheard her warbling down the street and had proceeded to serenade him with the song Babe every day at school for a fortnight. Why Take That? It was getting so bad that on a couple of occasions he'd caught himself humming their songs in class, which probably wouldn't have been so bad if he'd been female. Just as well his school reputation was non-existent anyway. He had hoped her infatuation would fade, and it had started to, but then, just as other artists had established themselves, what do they go and do? Launch a comeback. Her singing he could cope with, but it was her habit of gyrating her hips which banged into everything in sight that he would never come to terms with. Hello, Pumpkin, good day at school. Outwardly he smiled, but inwardly he winced at the pet name she had insisted on calling him, even in front of his friends and his teachers. Not bad, science test last thing, but I think I've done okay. He slouched onto the rip settee, but instead of switching on the television like most other children his age, he picked up his latest book. He was halfway through Charles Dickens' Hard Times, and he couldn't help but think that it had been aptly named, because it was certainly giving him difficulties. However, he persevered as his English teacher insisted that he read these classics to improve his writing skills. Why she encouraged this, he had no idea. He was already top of his English class, as he was in most other subjects, giving him the reputation of a boffin. This and the fact that his mother, who was a cleaner, who could barely afford to eat, had resulted in a miserable existence at school, where bullies such as Alvin took great delight in calling him Boff, Professor Pumpkin and Cleaner's Boy in lessons. Glancing at his hand, Michael wondered whether he should show his mum the ring and ask if she knew anything about a strange old man and his apparent family connection. Instinctively, he rejected the idea, thinking that seeing it would make her feel guilty about not being able to afford anything expensive for his birthday. Too excited to read and unable to think of anything to say to his mum, he sat patiently, daydreaming of a time when he would be rich and popular. I've made your favourite cottage pie as a special treat. Wearing her best dress, his mum waltzed into the room and placed the tray on his lap. Bloated from devouring his overlarge portion, he carried his plate to the kitchen before rushing to his room to change out of his uniform. Just as he was about to collapse onto his bed for a quick rest, he noticed a small, neatly wrapped present on his pillow. Hoping it contained the watch his mum had promised, he was thrilled when he gazed down at the metal face and strap, just like the one he'd imagined. As the proud owner of a new ring and a watch, he couldn't believe how lucky he was. Fastening the new strap around his skinny wrist, this time without the aid of a safety pin, he rushed to the kitchen and flung his arms around his mother's neck. She was thrilled. For the past year she had saved a small amount each month just to be able to afford it, and from the joy on his face she knew it had been worth every penny. She only regretted that she couldn't afford more, and that he still didn't have all of the gadgets and computers that other children his age enjoyed. Better than that tatty thing you wear at the moment, she joked, her face glowing with pleasure at her son's approval. Though only 15, Michael seemed so much older, and she often worried that he'd missed out on the carefree stage that other children had enjoyed. Clinging to him, she savoured his joy, unwilling to let him go. For although she always wore a brave face, they were both aware that it was also the anniversary of the day the police had classed his dad a missing person. Not knowing if he was alive or dead still haunted her, especially on days like this when it was brought to the forefront of her mind. You really look like him. Releasing him, she looked into his slim, innocent face. Same blue eyes and bone structure, just different colour hair, she said as she ran her hand through his blonde locks. Not wanting to wallow, he freed himself and rushed back into his room to change into something more comfortable. He needed some space to think about his dad, his ring, and the mysterious man at the shop. Suddenly, his ring finger started tingling. The gold band felt warm against his skin and the ruby in the centre started glowing. Michael gulped, blinking in disbelief. Then, almost as soon as it had started, the tingling subsided and the band and ruby returned to their normal state. Shocked, he was left wondering whether it had been his imagination playing tricks on him. His natural instinct was to rush to the kitchen and confide in his mum, yet he couldn't do it for fear of sounding ridiculous. How could he, a 15-year-old, tell his mum about a magical glowing ring and a disappearing shopkeeper? She'd tell him he was reading too many fantasy stories or declare him clinically insane. No, this was something he'd have to work out for himself. Well, obviously with the help of Dan and Hazel. Thank you very much for listening.